Hello. I am going live and I haven't figured out this background stuff yet on this live, but I wanted to join in and hold some accountability to myself because I teach ESL classes to adults about conversations, about reading, and a little bit about history. But this summer, I have a stack of books to read. And as I am reading them, I would like to hold myself a little bit accountable uh, to cleaning, but also to reading books. This one is The Attic Child. Now, I won't read the entire book to y'all, but I would like to read. My goal is a chapter, maybe two, if they're really short chapters, and just so that people can get a good idea of what the book might be about. And so I am going to start reading this one, Addict Child, and it is by Lola Jaye. And I have my husband in the background handing me some pomelo. And my book falls down. Well, he hands me that. Okay, I am live. And I'm going to read the end page here. It says a riveting dual narrative of love, loss, identity, centering on two children separated by decades who, bound by a secret, find themselves locked away in the same attic years apart. Early 1900s, taken from his homeland, 12-year-old Celestine spends most of the time locked away in the attic of a large house by the sea. The only time Celestine isn't bound by the confines of the small space is when he is acting as an unpaid servant to English explorer Sir Richard Babington. As the years pass, he desperately clings to memories of his family in Africa, even as he struggles to remember his mother's face, sometimes his real name. In 1974, Laura, Lowra, an young orphan girl born with wealth and privilege, finds herself trapped in the same attic. Searching for a ray of light in the darkness of the attic, Laura finds a message carved on the wall, written in an unidentifiable language. And under the floorboards, an old fashioned pen, a porcelain doll, and a beaded necklace, providing comfort for her when all hope is lost. These clues will lead to uncover the secrets of the attic. All right. And the prologue is very simple. It's very quick. Oh, I didn't. Prologue. And it says, I opened my eyes to death, but I'm still here. Why hasn't she claimed me? Apparently, it's my birthday tomorrow. Not yet 13. Yet nobody knows I exist. Each of the days melt into one long stretch. Weeks fly by, endless. I'm no longer afraid of the dark, the blackness, warm. Breathe. Footsteps. Is anyone out there? I hope not. Happy to stay here forever, if that's what it takes. Intrigued yet? So, part one is chapter one, and it's Dikembe. Dikembe? I'm going with that. Dikembe, 1903. We sat under the tall limba tree that day with no idea these were the last days of paradise. The branches and leaves cowered over us, a welcome protection from the blazing afternoon's heat. Behind, an uneven, sandy path through a row of trees which flourished majestically under a hazy sky. This was me, almost every day, cloaked in the familiarity and comfort of my favorite spot with my favorite brother, Kabili. Close enough to hear Mama calling for help with a chore, yet far away enough for the illusion of solitude, free to privately discuss pressing issues of the day, such as what would like to catch the multicolored thick-toed gecko moving toward the top of a tree. I almost caught one yesterday, said Kabili, my elder of 3 years. I believe the beginning of his story to be true because I never doubted anything from his mouth. Even if Kabili was well known in the family for telling half truths. Even if Kabili was known in the family for telling half truths. Just like when he insisted he'd been involved in the killing of the ram Mama served up last Sunday. An unfounded boast because everyone knew Kabili was the first to vomit at the sight of dripping blood. Being the youngest in my family, a host of questions permanently rested on the tip of my tongue. How do you outrun a gecko? The least important of them all. Kabili? Yes, brother. Where do you go when you go with them? The sound of my name punctured the moment. Dikembe! Even when raised, Mama's voice rang sweet inside my ears. Being the youngest of five and likely to be her last, I believed that all her sons, I was a special one. I felt this because she constantly made me feel this way with her words. Whispers mixed with an aroma of freshly made stew as we stood over a cooking fire. A good child, that is you. Mama often complained that not having a daughter meant being unable to pass on how to prepare the tastiest dishes for the home. Yet I was a willing student, soaking up all that she was willing to teach about cassava or the importance of banana leaves, while also being able to spend precious moments with her, as if I still remained attached to her breast. My older siblings, which sometimes included Kabili, would accompany our father on journeys outside the village and be gone sometimes for weeks at a time. Mama said they were working with my father in the timber trade. My father was a skilled craftsman and sculptor who had been taught by his own father, a skill that I'd hoped to one day master. My favorite carving of his was a footstool melded around the shape of a man with an elongated head, which he had sold at market. However, I hadn't seen anything he had made lately, as my father no longer carved at home. Mama explained that my father and brothers now simply worked away, yet I also never seen any of the items they had made. On a few occasions, I got to sit with him. It was with an audience of others. He did sometimes speak lovingly of the trees of his childhood. I once asked if he could take me back where those trees stood, and his expression hardened. Luckily, in those in a few short years, I would also be joining my brothers and father at work, and I would be able to see for myself what they did. For now, though, my happiness came from when nearest to my mama, hearing her talk, laugh, or just intertwine with her arms on a floor mat, laying in comfortable silence, as if waiting for something to interrupt the delicious contentment. At the age of 9, my journey into manhood seemed to trudge along slowly. Kabili was now 12 and regularly accompanied my father and brothers out of the house to work. They would return spent and would retire straight after Mama, with help, some help from me, had served an evening meal. Kabili would complain that work was not what he had imagined it to be, and that he wished he too could stay home. I couldn't understand why he would say this. When I asked as much, he glanced at me with what I could only describe as anger, as if I had said something wrong. Of course, I still enjoyed my time with Mama, but as an envy often nestled deep inside me, which I refused to leave, I was no longer content to be an outsider looking on as my kin embarked on a mission to feed and clothe the family. Men worked the land and toiled, while women kept the home. I was not yet a man. But this did not stop me from counting the days until I would be allowed to join my father and brothers. Home was a wooden hut under a roof, palm frond roof that housed everything we could ever need: mats for sleeping, a space to store our clothing. We lived away from the main village, an area I was forbidden to venture into. I was only allowed as far as our tree, and when I asked why, my mom just said she would beat me if I disobeyed her. She said this with tears in her eyes, and this, along with the fact that she had never beaten me in my entire life, confused me. So I basked in the joy of sitting at my mama's knee, listening to stories of the past until I succumbed to the afternoon sun, falling asleep with the head on her lap as the sound of her sweet humming danced in my ears. I never went past the tree until one day I made a decision. Are you saying you don't want to stay with your mama anymore? Mama didn't appear angry, and I was relieved by this. I had simply grown tired of hearing the triumph laced in Kabili's voice as he reeled off tales and exploits with our father and older brothers as they chopped wood and carved the pieces into shapes and styles to sell on, of the dangers they faced from the cheetahs who hid in the trees. I was ready to take up the mantle of manhood that each of my brothers already held on to. I was ready to contribute to the upkeep of my family, only what I imagined it to be. When I believed that momentous morning to have arrived, I approached my father. Not yet, my son. My father did not approve outbursts of emotion, so I swallowed mine down as best I could, yet couldn't help but be brave enough to ask, why? None of us ever questioned our father, and up until that moment, I had never had reason to. Most of my time had been spent with Mama anyway, and talking to my father wasn't something I knew how to do easily. But I felt this injustice deeply and needed to know the answer to my question. I said, Not yet. His words were firm and spoken with a finality that saddened me. He quickly pulled away and drew my mama into a private conversation communication. I couldn't hear their words, but she held her face to her hands as my father rested palms on the back of his head. Their bodies spoke of defeat, but I could not imagine what for, as I had only asked to accompany my father and brothers to work. I was ready. Surely this was a good thing. The following morning, I watched as my father and brothers prepared for work. They very seldom ate before they left, but Mama sent them off with provisions which they would eat as soon as they got to their work destination. I followed closely behind them, managing to remain hidden thanks to the welcoming presence of aligned trees which covered my tiny frame as I sprinted from bark to bark. My chest puffed out and mimicking how my father and brothers moved, face upturned and shoulders erect, just like one of those trees. With Mama, I felt safe and warm, but with my father and my four brothers, Kabili, Yogo, Dejama, and Paco, I felt an urge of urgency I was not familiar with. I hoped to observe them long enough for me to learn everything I could about how they spent their days and see, perhaps, why I had not been allowed to accompany them. My aim was to be back at home before Mama even noticed I had gone. The trees were sparse, so there were always a danger of losing sight of my family as I trailed behind and attempted to remain out of sight. I was certainly relieved when they reached the edge of the stream and stopped. Two men, dressed identically in blue jackets and red fezzes on their heads, greeted my father. They reminded me of the birds I had seen a few times with coats the brightest of blue, yellow beaks, and red topped heads. This amused me until I noticed what looked like weapons of some sort tucked under their arms. I slapped away a fly and may have made a sound of annoyance, and it was Kabili who looked back and towards me. Kabili, who sometimes knew what I would say before I said it. It was always going to be him. Our eyes locked. The man in uniform now had his hand on my father's shoulder, and it seemed to me that my father began to shrink before him. My tall and brave father, now in an instant shorter in stature, as this man raised his voice to him in a language I did not understand. None of what I was witnessing made any sense to me. My father ran a timber business and had taught my brothers everything they knew about wood. So why was he taking an order from another man? While my brothers looked on as if this was an everyday occurrence. Sorry. My mind attempted to explain what I was witnessing, just as the second man spoke hurried words to my brother Paco, before raising his hand and bringing it down upon the right side of my brother's face with a force I never knew was possible. I gasped, and then I covered my mouth. I waited for my father to spring into action, but the silence felt piercing and prolonged as he did nothing. Even as Paco helped himself to his feet, my father simply watched as if he could not see what I saw. My expectation grew into a state of confusion. Once the uniformed man had moved away, Cabelli walked quietly toward my hiding place. Dicamby, I knew it was you. But what if Paco and you better go home, or else I will tell our father. Go, Dicamby, go, he hissed. I felt his hand on my back as he shoved me in that direction I had come from. Kabilly had never treated me in this way before. We were the closest of brothers. I knew him the best, and he knew me. However, in that moment, I did not recognize him. You must go back to your mother, said my father, finally noticing my presence as he walked towards us. My body was inches away from collapsing into the tantrums of a toddler. I wanted to go with them. I also wanted to ask who were those men and why had they struck my brother and why my father had done nothing. Instead, he did something that day I never witnessed him to do with any of us boys before. He knelt down to my height and placed each of his hands in mine. The small world around us seemed to cease. His touch was unfamiliar yet welcome. His hands, drier and coarser than my mamma's, instead of her sweet aroma, the scent of sweat. Listen, my son, this is no place for you. Not now. And if I can help it, not ever. You go back to your mother now before they see you. We will not tell her about this. But go now before they see you. Who were they? Oh, Dickenby, he sighed. I looked in his eyes and once again saw something I had never seen before in those rare moments when I had got this close to him. Now in his eyes was fear. I blinked rapidly, blocking the emotion, threatening to embarrass me in front of my father, let alone my brothers, who in that moment I had forgotten about. Dikembe, you will do as I say. You will go home. Something in his voice lacked the firmness I was used to, and I felt so sad and so desperately sad. I will go home. I turned and ran as fast as I could from the unfamiliarity of that moment back to safety of the cooking fire and my mama. It was nightfall, before they returned. Impatience lodged in my throat because for once I wanted Kabilly to explain every detail of what happened. But as soon as we boys had eaten, Mama and my father became embroiled in a deep conversation with no place for childish chatter. They are talking about the white men again, whispered Kabilly as he shrugged his tired shoulders. Ever since he had begun accompanying my father and brothers, Kabilly often appeared sleepy and ready for slumber until I had enough energy to run around the yard many more times. I had 1,000 questions. Who were those men this morning? I must sleep, Dickenby. My brother, usually so full of stories, gave no answer. Why did they do that to our brother? I said. This work is not easy, he mumbled as he lay on the floor, head resting in his palm. That night, as my father and brother slumbered, I felt a restlessness which did not allow for sleep. A hollowness resided in my chest, a space that could only be filled by my mama. She was outside scrubbing the pot she used earlier to cook the cassava, cassava leaves. What is it, my Dikembe? She tilted her head to the side. I am unable to sleep, Mama. She smiled, placing the pot to one side. Come, she said. We sat close together on the floor, and with her damp hand, she smoothed my head, humming the same tune as always. And yet, I had never asked the name of I simply enjoy the way it danced unapologetically into my ears, sounding delicious and familiar. Her smell, like the sweetest of fruit, allowing me to slowly surrender to the nighttime. I wanted to ask her what I had seen, but if I did that, she'd know I defied her. My Dicambre, she said. Yes, Mama? My last born, Juana Mua. Yes, Mama, I said. The way she exhaled and patted my shoulder with graceful hand told me what was to come, and a fizzle of excitement rose within me. I looked at her face, and she began my bedtime story. There was once two kings who ruled our land. The Red King is named Mamba, and he is a cruel king and very unforgiving. He does not know how to control what he does, and he is a brute. He's not nice, Mama. He is not. But the good king is named, I'm going to say Biddy Kilu. Remember? Yes, Mama. He has a beautiful dark skin and it shines even in the night. They call him the Black King. And he is one who brought our civilization to our lands. His voice is very soft and he knows how to behave. He is good, like you. Yes, Mama. This is why I call you a good child. I nodded my head. He knows how to control himself. He sounds much nicer than the Red King, Mama, I said, stifling a yawn. She placed the back of her delicate hand back in my cheek and smiled. You must always be like Beauty. You must always be the Black King. I opened my eyes the next morning before dawn, which should have been the first indication something was amiss and unbalanced. Usually, my brothers and I would remain sleeping until the cockerel crowed, each of them stepping over me in a race to wash first. There was seldom enough water left of me in the container, and I hoped that this time I wouldn't have to fetch more or go to the stream and wash with our neighbors. My father left alone, ahead of my brothers, as he sometimes did, with Mama saying he had an important meeting with the village elders and decisions had to be made about the future. He had set out early, promising to be back before sunset. Ina Belinga was our closest neighbor. She lived near to the village and had a gap in her teeth. She often brought yams or the ripest mangoes for my family, which I had suspected was just another excuse to sit and talk endlessly with Mama. Mama referred to her as a good friend, and my father called her a gossip. To me, she was just a lady who brought delicious things for us to eat, and one of only a few people other than my family that I saw often. Today, though, she came empty handed, her lips quivering over her gap teeth as her eyes searched toward the floor. Where's your Mama? She said. I tried to find her gaze, but she refused to meet mine. She's out back. I will wait in the house, she said. She sat on the floor on the mat Mama had placed there earlier. I offered her some water, which she declined. I wanted to ask her why she wasn't smiling, why I could no longer see the gap in her teeth. Like the events of the previous day and walking up before the sound of the cockerel, this was unfamiliar and slightly unsettling. When Mama returned, Ina Belinga failed to greet her in the usual way. This was a greeting bereft of woman laughter, as my father called it. Instead, they remained inside, talking quietly as I waited outside the hut as Inga Belinka had instructed. They remained they remained inside the longest of times, even after my brothers had returned home. I flinched at the raised sounds coming from our house, which sounded not unlike an injured animal. Forever obedient, Kabili and I stayed put. But our three older brothers, Yogo, Jama, and Paco, rushed inside. Minutes later, when my brothers emerged from the house, their faces were fresh with tears. This I did not understand because men were not supposed to cry. My father always said so. He had not actually told me that, but he had said as much to Paco, who then related to me passionately as I tearfully folded myself into Mama's arms after falling over outside. I moved closer to the sound of the wounded animal, which now sounded closer to its demise, pain, fear, sorrow etched into one long, agonizing howl. I peered inside, and Inga Balinka was comforting my mother, her hand smoothing the braids of my mama's head as she sat in front of her. My mama's hands were curled into fists, beating her own chest. Inga Balinga spoke hurriedly as Mama continued this physical onslaught, screaming her pain. And I wanted to run to her, console her, just as she had done for me on many occasions. I was her last born, a good child, her special child, and it was my job to do so. Inga Belinga stood and turned to me, halting my approach. Her face was awash with tears. What is it, Ina Belinga? I asked. Your father. It is your father. The Belgians. The force public. I could no longer hear Ina Belinga's voice. I did not know what some of her words meant anyway. I didn't But my mind remained locked on the image of my mother, so distraught she was beating herself. I do not understand. What do you mean? I said, watching my mamma carefully as she fell silent, her mouth parted, her eyes open, but without focus, her whole demeanor like a goat about to be slaughtered when it no longer has the strength to fight. My legs became weak and unsteady as I began to perceive the seriousness of what had happened, even before Ina Belinga said quietly, They killed him, Dikembe. Your father is dead. Do I dare read chapter 2? Oh my gosh! What an adventure already! That is just chapter 1. Oh my gosh. I'm excited. I hope y'all are excited too. And maybe consider reading along with me The Attic Child by Lola Jaye. I hope to reach out to y'all again soon, and maybe I'll have some cleaning done before then. Hopefully, cleaning will not be my excuse of reading. Hope you have a great day, and thank you for uh, joining me on my journey of reading. Thank you. Bye.